Welcome to Things You Don't Know. Today, in our continuing series on thinking about Trump and presidents, we're going to talk about the issue of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Now, freedom of speech is really easy to defend when we agree with the speaker. The real test comes when the speaker criticizes the president, mocks the government, or says something offensive. President Donald Trump has repeatedly demanded that television personalities be fired, celebrated the cancellation of programs critical of him, threatened broadcasters with government action, and supported eliminating federal money for public broadcasting. The question is not whether Jimmy Kimmel or Stephen Colbert, NPR, or PBS are politically biased. The question is whether a president should use the power and influence of his office against voices he dislikes.
I think the answer to that is a definite no, but we should be careful with the word censorship. A president has freedom of speech also. President Trump can criticize comedians, accuse networks of bias, recommend that viewers stop watching, and argue that taxpayers should not finance political programming. It's important to remember not every cancellation is a government conspiracy. Television networks of private businesses' programs lose money, audiences change, and executives make unpopular decisions.
And that's true, but the concern begins when criticism is combined with regulatory threats. When the President of the United States attacks a broadcaster while officials who control licenses, investigations, and merger approvals apply pressure, the message to every media company becomes clear. Criticizing the administration may carry a financial cost.
Yeah. So the First Amendment does not require ABC, CBS, or any other private company to employ a particular entertainer. A network can cancel a program because of ratings, finances, offensive material, or poor judgment. But the Supreme Court has also made clear that government officials cannot use private companies and intermediaries to suppress speech. In its unanimous 2024 decision in National Rifle Associations versus Bulow, the court said government officials may not coerce private parties into punishing or suppressing views the government dislikes.
And the word coerce matters. Government officials are still allowed to express an opinion. They may condemn a television program or ask whether a broadcaster is meeting its legal obligations. We should not automatically treat every government complaint as an unconstitutional threat.
But the official's authority matters here too. A complaint from an ordinary viewer is one thing. A warning from the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, that's a whole different thing. Because broadcasters depend on decisions made by that agency. The FCC itself explains that it licenses individual television and radio stations, not national networks such as ABC, CBS, NBC, or Fox. That makes broad presidential threats to revoke a network's license legally misleading, but threats against affiliated stations can still create enormous pressure. Trump's dispute with Jimmy Kimmel did not consist of one angry comment alone. After CBS announced the end of Stephen Colbert's program, Trump publicly suggested that Kimmel be next. In September 2025, after Kimmel made a controversial comment surrounding the killing of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, FCC Chairman Brendan Carr publicly called for consequences and indicated that regulators could act against ABC and its affiliate. Major affiliate owners said they would stop carrying the programming, and ABC suspended Jimmy Kimmel Live. Trump celebrated the suspension, said that Kimmel should have been fired long before. ABC restored the show several days later. And then, in April 2026, Trump directly demanded that Disney and ABC immediately fire Kimmel following another disputed monologue.
Kimmel's defenders sometimes leave out the fact that his comments were made during an emotional national moment. Networks and local station owners have responsibilities to their audiences. They may decide that a host has crossed the line without being ordered to do so by the White House. Trump also argued that Kimmel's ratings and talents did not justify keeping him on television. Presidents are allowed to have opinions about entertainers, even very harsh and personal opinions.
Yeah, but Trump did more than review Kimmel's television performance. He repeatedly demanded that the employer remove a prominent critic. At the same time, the nation's chief broadcast regulator was raising the possibility of government action, kind of threatening it. Trump does not have to issue a written warning saying, fire this person. A media company may understand that keeping a presidential critic could complicate license reviews, investigations, acquisitions, or other business that comes before the government.
And that creates a chilling effect. Executives begin asking not only whether a joke is offensive or unprofitable, but whether it will anger someone who controls their regulatory future. A comedian does not have a constitutional right to a television contract, but Americans do have a legitimate interest in knowing whether government power influenced the loss of that contract.
Yeah, the Stephen Colbert case requires careful wording because direct presidential responsibility has not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. CBS announced in July 2025 that The Late Show with Stephen Colbert would end in 2026 and that the entire franchise would be retired. CBS called it a purely financial decision and said it had nothing to do with Colbert's content or other matters involving its parent company, Paramount. However, the program had been the most watched show in its late night time slot. The announcement came shortly after Colbert criticized Paramount's $16 million settlement of Trump's lawsuit concerning a 60 Minutes interview. Paramount was also pursuing a merger that required FCC approval. Trump publicly celebrated Colbert's removal.
There is still a strong business argument for CBS. Late night television is expensive, advertising revenue is weakened, audiences have moved towards streaming, and even a first place program can lose money. CBS did not replace Colbert with a conservative host. It ended the entire Late Show franchise. That supports the company's claim that this was a broader financial decision rather than an attempt to install pro-Trump programming.
Well, yeah, but a chilling effect does not require replacing Colbert with a Republican comedian. Eliminating a prominent critic sends its own message. The timing, it was extraordinary. Paramount settled with Trump. Colbert denounced the settlement. The company needed federal approval for a major transaction, and the show was canceled soon afterwards. Trump then celebrated and then went on to predict that critical host would follow. That does not prove a secret order. It does, however, justify investigation and public skepticism.
Yes, I would say that is correct. We should not say, as an established fact, that Trump personally ordered CBS to cancel Colbert. We can say that Trump had called for hostile comedians to be removed, that he benefited politically from the decision, celebrated that, and operated an administration with regulatory influence over Paramount's business interests. The danger is not merely whether one telephone call occurred. It is whether corporations learn that cooperation with the administration brings rewards, while criticism brings difficulties.
That's right, Dr. Weaver. Now, the attack on public broadcasting was much more direct. Trump proposed taking back approximately $1.1 billion that Congress had already approved for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for fiscal years 2026 and 2027. Congress passed the rescission, and Trump signed it. The money was not simply just a check written directly to the national NPR and PBS newsrooms. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting distributed support throughout the system of more than 1,500 locally operated public radio and television stations.
While I personally would not like to see PBS disappear, I will give you the other side of the argument. NPR and PBS cover politics, culture, and social issues, and many conservatives believe their programming leans a little to the left. People should be absolutely free to produce that material, but some would say taxpayers should not necessarily be required to subsidize it. In a country with thousands of radio stations, television channels, podcasts like our own, websites, and streaming services, public broadcasting is no longer the only source of cultural and educational programming. Ending a subsidy is not the same as banning or censoring speech.
Yeah, and Dr. Deneen, you're stating the administration's strongest argument. Congress controls public spending, and no media organization is automatically entitled to permanent federal support. But, but the practical effect reaches beyond nationally recognized political programs. CPB funding helps local stations produce community reporting, children's programming, educational material, cultural programs, and emergency information. Now, rural stations may have fewer donors and fewer commercial alternatives than stations in large cities.
And there's also a troubling consistency in the targets that we need to point out here. Trump accused NPR and PBS of being biased, demanded that their funding end, celebrated Colbert's cancellation, repeatedly demanded Kimmel's firing, and threatened broadcast outlets that refused to follow his preferences. Each action can be defended separately. Taken together, they resemble an effort to weaken institutions that regularly criticize him.
Both of you make some valid points. I do not want to claim that I have a monopoly on the truth at all. Giving it the other side of the issue, it could represent a president confronting a media establishment that many Americans genuinely distrust. You will remember this has happened before, going all the way back to Vice President Agnew's famous speech on the media 55 years ago. The public should not assume blindly that journalists or comedians are neutral simply because they describe themselves as defenders of democracy. Some programs openly oppose Trump and conservatives in general, which is their right to do. Viewers are entitled to recognize that.
Well, they are, but political bias does not cancel First Amendment principles. Conservative speech, liberal speech, objective reporting, partisan commentary, satire, and even unfair criticism all all receive protection from government retaliation. And by the way, certain stations like Fox News Entertainment seem to not be bothered with these kind of things, and they are generally biased in the other direction. So, Trump has repeatedly suggested that broadcasters should lose licenses because of programming decisions or unfavorable coverage. In July 2026, he again threatened ABC and NBC after they declined to carry one of his speeches live on their main television networks.
A president can complain that major networks are failing to serve the public because broadcasters use public airwaves and licensed stations do have legal obligations. That said, I do see a troubling amount of personalization of the complaints about some administration officials. It is reasonable for conservatives to ask why some presidential speeches receive full coverage while others are treated as partisan events. But I would think there needs to be a greater attempt at looking at things from multiple points of view.
Well, now, the networks can be criticized for that decision, but the government cannot punish them simply just because the president dislikes an editorial judgment. Presidents do not own television airtime. News organizations decide which speeches, rallies, and statements deserve live coverage. That independence is part of a free press.
And there is an important difference between saying the network is unfair, stop watching it, and saying that network is unfair. The government should take away its ability to broadcast. Two very different statements. The first statement is political speech, protected speech. The second introduces state power and control like an authoritarian government might have.
You're quite correct. Perhaps a revealing comparison comes from President Lyndon Johnson and the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. The Smothers Brothers criticized President Johnson, the Vietnam War, censorship, and all aspects of the political establishment. Their program repeatedly clashed with CBS over controversial material. In October 1968, the brothers wrote Johnson an apology acknowledging that some of their satirical attacks had gone too far. The president responded graciously rather than demanding their removal.
Yeah, Johnson wrote that it was part of the price of leadership of this great and free nation to be the target of clever satirists, unquote. He also thanked them for giving Americans laughter. So the note was not exactly an unsolicited congratulatory letter. It was Johnson's generous response to their apology, but it was congratulatory in spirit. He recognized that being mocked came with holding powerful office.
And I think this is a really important part here. Johnson had plenty of reasons to resent these people. They attacked the policy that was destroying his presidency. Their satire reached millions of people during a deeply divided period. Now, this is very important here, folks. Regardless of all this, Johnson, he did not publicly demand that CBS fire them. He acknowledged that satire was part of governing a free country. And I think that means something, folks.
It does, Shanley. You're absolutely right. It's worth noting that the Smothers Brothers program was eventually canceled by CBS in 1969 after years of conflict over scripts, deadlines, public taste, and political content. Their experience proves that Pressure on political comedy and political comedians existed long before Trump.
It did. Trump did not invent government hostility toward the press or network censorship. Presidents from both parties have complained about reporters, pursued leakers, restricted access, and attempted to control public narratives. What makes the Johnson letter important is the standard it expresses. Strong leaders tolerate ridicule because freedom is more important than personal comfort.
It is. I would still slightly distinguish comedians from reporters. Kimmel and Colbert were not presenting neutral newscasts. Their monologues frequently attacked Trump and promoted liberal interpretations of events. When comedy becomes political advocacy, comedians of all stripes should expect political responses.
Yeah, they should expect responses, criticism, boycotts, and competing comedy. They should not have to wonder whether a joke will bring an FCC investigation or if it will interfere with their employer's merger. Political satire has never been neutral. Its function is to challenge authority, expose contradiction, and say things that formal journalists may not say as directly.
Yes, a free press is larger than newspapers and evening newscasts. It includes documentary makers, editorial writers, cartoonists, commentators, independent creators, and satirists. A government officials do not get to decide that only neutral or respectful speakers deserve freedom.
No, they don't. And that freedom must also protect conservative critics of NPR, CBS, PBS, and ABC. People should be able to argue that those organizations are biased, refuse to watch them, and oppose public subsidies.
Agreed. And the answer to biased speech is more speech, not threats that connect government power to political loyalty.
Okay, we could go on here, but let's see if we can kind of wrap things up a little bit. Trump's defenders can reasonably argue that networks make their own business decisions, that broadcasters should be accountable, and that taxpayers should not be forced to finance programming they consider partisan. But a president is not merely another television critic. He appoints regulators, signs spending bills, influences merger approvals, directs federal agencies, and commands a powerful political movement.
Trump has every right to fight back against coverage he believes is dishonest. But even supporters, and I am, should be uncomfortable when criticism becomes a demand that government power be used against the speaker. A conservative administration that creates such power may and has later see it used against conservative media by a liberal administration.
And that is why freedom of speech cannot strictly depend on whether we like Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, NPR, PBS, Donald Trump, or the Smothers Brothers, or anybody for that matter.
Yeah, Lyndon Johnson understood the basic requirement. Being mocked is part of the price of leadership in a free nation. Read that in bold print. The president may answer the joke. He may condemn it. He may even tell people, don't watch that crap. But the government should never become the censor.
Well put, Dr. Weaver, if I may say so.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, listen, we hope you've gotten something from this. And if you have comments, hey, unlike some, we are open to those comments. We will not censor them at all, and we will try to respond.
And we will not condemn you for your opinions.
Nope.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So come on back and see us. For now, bye.
Bye for now, folks.
Bye bye.